When they drew up the vision for a new Europe, it wasn't meant to look like this. Lines of riot police blocking Austria's border with Italy, clashing with demonstrators who wanted to pass through.
Aber diese negativen Sachen, die da passieren, diese vielen Überfälle. Meiner Tochter haben es weggestohlen, ihre sündbare Tasche mit dem ganzen Inhalt.
We have millions waiting in Africa. What shall we do with them? Come all over to Europe, to Britain, to Austria? Impossible.
There's a new border force joining soldiers and police, military helicopters on patrol, and water cannon at the ready.
This is Austria, a country of over 9 million people, known for its stunning Alps, history, and, at one point, its openness to immigration. It was among the first countries in Europe to welcome those fleeing war and poverty. But today, things have changed, and that welcoming stance is gradually fading. Recently, Austria's interior minister announced plans for basic service centers and suitable infrastructure to get asylum seekers all in one place. A statement that sent shockwaves through Europe. But it wasn't just a statement or idea. It was a promise, a command for change. In a border town in Borkenland, lace floodlights reveal groups of exhausted migrants crossing from Hungary. Locals talk of an invasion at their doorstep, and more than half of Austrians now feel the country should stop accepting new refugees. The national mood has changed, and Chancellor Karl Nehammer has stressed pulling the brake on illegal migration. As Austria takes a more hardline stance on immigration, the question arises: why is this once welcoming country shifting its approach? Today on Across the Globe, we'll dive into the refugee surges, political changes over the past decade, and the policies that have many Austrians asking, what is happening to our country?
New Austrian limits on the number of refugees allowed to cross its borders have infuriated the EU, prompting warnings that Vienna could be breaking European law.
These are self-defense weapons, including CS gas, alarm systems, and a shotgun that doesn't require a weapons permit. Party members deny they're trying to scare people by making presentations like this.
In 2015, Austria became a key entry point to Germany during the European migrant crisis, as over 90,000 asylum seekers, 3 times more than the previous year, passed through the country. At first, many Austrians showed sympathy, but public concern soon grew. In 2016, another 42,000 asylum seekers tried to enter, prompting fears about social strain. This led to a huge policy shift. Emergency laws were passed allowing authorities to close the borders to nearly all asylum seekers if they were considered a threat to public order or national security. This allowed the government to reject asylum claims at the border, including from Syrians, except in extreme cases. The asylum process was tightened, and family reunification became more difficult. This marked a sharp break from Austria's post-World War II tradition of welcoming refugees. But what caused this transformation? One major factor was the sheer scale of the crisis. It goes without saying that 2015 was the year where Austria really got concerned. The country took in more than 1% of its population as refugees that year, one of Europe's highest rates per capita. The poor conditions and overcrowded facilities for the growing number of asylum seekers sparked widespread criticism, especially at the Traiskirchen Processing Center. Shocking images of chaos at frontier train stations and the tragic death of 71 immigrants in a smuggler's truck rattled the nation. That same public sympathy quickly turned to fear of being overwhelmed. Populist parties, particularly the far-right Freedom Party, FPO, acted on these fears, warning of threats to Austria's borders and culture. As a response, mainstream politicians adopted tougher stances to avoid being overshadowed. By 2017, this shift was solidified. Sebastian Kurz, a young conservative with a firm anti-immigration platform, became chancellor, forming a coalition with the FPO. Illegal migration must be stopped, Kurz declared, promising no repeat of 2015. The FPO's interior minister, Herbert Kickl, even suggested that the European Convention on Human Rights might need adjusting to make tougher asylum policies easier. Under Kurz, asylum applications plummeted, around 22,000 in 2017, thanks to stricter borders and a deal that shut down the Balkan route. The majority of applicants came from Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. That same year, positive opinion on integration dropped to a record low of 36.5%, and by 2024, a majority now opposed accepting new refugees. But to truly understand Austria's tough stance, we have to look into the measures at its borders, where the most visible signs of its war on immigration are on full display, and have been for many years now.
Hungary's M1 motorway heading into Austria. The Austrian authorities have tightened controls on incoming lorries after last week's gruesome discovery of 71 dead migrants in a truck.
Troops have been deployed at Spielfeld on the frontier with Slovenia, where they've been charged with helping police process 6,000 migrants over 12 hours.
Austria's border strategy shows its immigration concerns more clearly than any policy paper ever could. Though the country sits inside the Schengen zone, where borders are meant to fade away, Vienna keeps blurring that line along its edges. Since 2015, a mix of soldiers and police have lined the passes from Hungary and Slovenia, waving down cars, opening boots, and glancing at passports just like they did decades ago. Officials in Vienna call the patrols a shield against unauthorized crossings and the smuggling rackets that make them easier. In late 2023, a stateless man in Austria was caught smuggling 22 Turkish and Syrian migrants in a van that crashed in Germany, claiming the lives of 7, fueling Austria's resolve to crack down on human smuggling. While Austria hasn't built a Hungary-style wall, it hasn't hesitated to put up barriers when needed. In 2016, fearing migrant flows through the Brenner Pass from Italy, Austria proposed building a border fence and deployed armored vehicles to the mountain pass. This move was in response to expected increases in migrant numbers from Libya and Italy, following the closure of the Balkan route. Italy's then Prime Minister Matteo Renzi condemned the plan, calling it shamelessly against European rules, history, logic, and the future. Then, on its southeastern border with Slovenia, Austria installed temporary fences and checkpoints during the crisis, sending a clear message. It would not be a transit route for unchecked migration. However, Slovenian government officials told Euractiv that these border controls imposed by Austria make no sense, since the number of migrants trying to cross is very low, stating that only 27 migrants attempted to cross the border in 2017, and the number of asylum seekers who chose this route in 2016 was under 100. While these numbers may have been considered low to Slovenia, they were still too high for Austria's liking. And the strict measures don't end there. Within the EU, Austria has taken a firm stand on border security. In late 2022, Vienna vetoed Romania and Bulgaria's entry into the Schengen area, citing concerns over migrant crossings. Chancellor Nehammer called for EU efforts to fortify the external border, proposing 2 billion euros to expand Bulgaria's fence along Turkey. Every fence is only as good as its surveillance, he insisted, advocating for more cameras, drones, and border guards. Austria effectively held Schengen expansion hostage until it believed illegal migration was under control, only giving way in late 2024 after claiming progress. These tactics highlight Austria's willingness to act as a strong defender of Fortress Europe, even if it means challenging EU partners to tighten border controls. So, while Austria is fighting hard to keep illegal immigrants out, what is life like for migrants that already live in the country?
The Austrian government also says it will give 500 euros to migrants who are willing to be deported. As a European solution to the refugee crisis remains out of sight, countries are increasingly taking measures into their own hands.
Austria's three-party coalition agreed it would temporarily halt family reunification procedures for migrants, a move critics say is a violation of European asylum law.
As Austria keeps slamming down the boot, life for those already living here has become much more difficult. In 2016, asylum rules have tightened considerably. The introduction of temporary asylum permits meant refugees could only hold their resident status for 3 years, dragging out uncertainty and keeping families apart longer. Under the Kurz government and successors, welfare benefits for asylum seekers and even legal immigrants were trimmed down, most notably in 2019, when a policy aimed to cut social aid for newcomers with limited German skills, effectively penalizing them until they integrated. Austria's coalition government implemented plans to cut benefit payments for immigrants, including refugees, in an effort to deter new arrivals. The main benefit was capped at 563 euros, or $655 a month, with the possibility of increasing to 863 euros, matching what native Austrians get, if the immigrant passed a German language test. On top of that, immigrants were barred from claiming these benefits for 5 years. In 2023-2024, Austria implemented more controversial policies as center-right/Green coalition faced pressure from the growing far right. Asylum seekers could lose their small stipends if they don't complete required community work, such as cleaning, helping at elderly homes, or winter road repair, according to Interior Minister Gerhard Karner. Those who refuse could see their stipends reduced from 40 euros to 20 euros, with the government framing this as a way to provide refugees with structure and promote Austrian values. Critics, however, saw it as coercive, low-status labor aimed at vulnerable migrants. But what has probably been the most shocking move is Austria's play toward offshore asylum processing. In late 2023, many EU members sought the UK's Rwanda model to fix the asylum crisis. Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer praised then British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's migration policy, describing the Rwanda model as a trailblazer in fighting irregular migration to Europe. Austria then entered into a cooperation agreement with the United Kingdom to work on a migration plan that would send asylum seekers to a third country while their claims are processed, similar to the UK's one-way deportation plan. Notably, Austria's version would allow those granted protection to return home later, unlike the UK's approach. Once a taboo idea in Europe, Austria now seems eager to lead the charge. Yet, beyond asylum, Austria is cracking down in a different way, going after not just illegal immigrants, but visa overstayers. Police raids targeting undocumented workers have gotten way more intense. In November 2024, Austria played a key role in a major EU-wide operation targeting organized crime along the Balkan route. Led by Germany, the operation resulted in the dismantling of a large criminal network involved in migrant smuggling, weapons trafficking, and document fraud. The operation, carried out by a task force involving authorities from Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Serbia, the UK, and other European countries, saw over 450 officers involved. Austria played a key role, with local law enforcement participating in coordinated raids and investigations. On November 20th, the operation led to 25 arrests across Europe, including 6 in Austria. The Austrian government has also pressured countries like India, Morocco, and Nigeria, where many rejected asylum seekers come from, to return their nationals, even suggesting visa sanctions if they don't cooperate. So the message to potential migrants is pretty clear. Don't come, and if you do, you won't find a warm welcome. Herbert Kickl, leader of the far-right FPO, bluntly states that re-immigration is the goal, sending uninvited migrants back to their home countries. This firm hand method has led to a tripling of detention numbers since 2015, with asylum seekers now held up to 14 days pending removal, up from 5 days, despite numbers of asylum seekers going down. Even recognized refugees face growing uncertainty as the government considers limiting asylum residencies and making refugee status temporary by default. So it's fair to say that Austria is fixed on this approach. But what if we told you that there is more going on behind the scenes that you might not be aware of? Things that bring many other countries deep into the growing conversation. In the middle of Austria's crackdown, several lesser-known stories reveal the complexities fueling its urgency. In 2022, thousands from India, Tunisia, and Morocco exploited Serbia's visa-free policy, flying into Belgrade as tourists and then crossing into Austria, despite these countries not being at war. This loophole made India the second largest group of asylum seekers that year, overwhelming Austria's system. This led Serbia to end its visa-free entry for Tunisians in November 2022, and to announce alignment with EU visa policies to address the issue. After Serbia made their move, Indian asylum numbers dropped, but the episode left Austrians cautious that anyone, anywhere, could exploit similar gaps. Another underreported issue is Austria's internal burden sharing. Some provinces, often led by conservative or far-right parties, refused to open new shelters, leaving overcrowded federal centers and even unaccompanied minors in tents during winter. Not only was this widely criticized as inhumane, the dispute really ramped up when the mayor began having the tents taken down. But many say there's an irony in Austria's stance. While cracking down on illegal migration, it quietly relies on controlled immigration to address labor shortages. With an aging population, Austria expanded its skilled worker visas and looked for foreign care workers. Yet, this side of immigration rarely sparks conversation. Instead, debates focus almost exclusively on asylum and illegal arrivals, creating a paradox. Austria enforces strict borders while inviting others in for economic needs. And to better understand all of this, it's worth looking at the key players involved here. Influential people who have swayed the national conversation have been the driving force behind Austria's move towards strict immigration laws. The former Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, was crucial. He called for the closure of the Balkan route while serving as foreign minister in 2015. By 2017, he had relaunched his center-right party with a tough stance on border control and changed its color to turquoise, showing that hardline policies could win elections. However, many criticized him for transforming the People's Party into a strong anti-immigrant force, reshaping it in his own image. Herbert Kickl, leader of the far-right FPO, has been even more tough. As Interior Minister in 2018, he proposed concentrating asylum seekers in central locations and pushed for aggressive policies like raids on refugee shelters and seizing migrants' phones, as well as demanding up to €840, $1,040 in cash. Kickl also floated ideas such as processing asylum seekers on ships offshore or housing them in basic departure centers to discourage settlement. Now, as FPO leader, he champions Austria for Austrians, something that has been chanted since the days of Eins Christian Straka. Chancellor Karl Nehammer, OVP, speaks of migration in crisis terms, urging Austria to pull the brake and focus on stopping inflows, regardless of border infrastructure. Interior Minister Gerhard Karner has ramped up deportations and criticized other EU countries' asylum procedures, claiming Austria's restrictive policies are working, with arrivals falling significantly. Even the Greens, once more sympathetic to refugees, have had to accept stricter policies to keep the coalition together, silencing many of the last that are still pro-immigration. The opposition is also shifting. A recent Social Democratic regional leader suggested maybe the asylum cap should be zero for a few years, drawing public support, though the party's national leader dismissed the idea as moronic. President Alexander Van der Bellen, a Green, occasionally reminds the nation of its humanitarian duties, but holds little influence over policy. Overall, Austria's political landscape now centers around one main message: drastically limiting immigration. Calls for compassion or EU solidarity are being overshadowed by the slogan, Austria First. But despite how it may look on the surface, at its core, Austria's tough immigration policies have deeply divided public opinion. Protests frequently come up. Refugee advocates and church groups call for humane treatment, while right-wing demonstrators protest asylum abuse. NGOs like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch condemn Austria's measures as drastic and unjust, warning they undermine refugee protections. Judith Sunderland, acting Deputy Europe and Central Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, said, "These measures constitute a legal wall to asylum just as despicable as a razor wire fence." The UN and many EU officials voiced concern over Austria's 2016 emergency asylum law, but Austrian authorities continue to defend their stance as addressing legitimate fears, citing other countries' failures and border pressures. Internationally, Austria's policies have drawn criticism from allies. Luxembourg's Prime Minister Xavier Bettel opposed EU-funded fences, emphasizing Europe's legacy of tearing down walls, saying Europe's heritage was overcoming divisions after the Second World War. Germany, which at first adopted a different course, has recently tightened its borders in response to Austria's more stringent position. Under Giorgia Meloni, Italy, which was at odds over border walls during the 2015-16 crisis, is now taking a tough stance. In an effort to reduce migration, the European Commission has recently turned to more drastic measures, such as fast-track border camps and agreements with nations like Tunisia, although it has long sought similar asylum rules. However, not everyone in Austria is in favor of this change, which is equally crucial to remember. Shame is voiced by liberal groups, students, and urban residents, who often oppose tent camps in the Rwanda model, seeing them as immoral. Green MPs and the Catholic Church caution that Austria's international standing is under jeopardy. Proposals that are controversial, such as requiring asylum seekers to perform public work in order to repay Austria, have provoked criticism and accusations of public shaming. So while the hardline approach certainly dominates, a quiet debate about Austria's choices continues beneath the surface. While some of the backlash may be warranted, Austria is not the first country to enact these kinds of measures, whether they are seen as drastic or not. And either way, they are proud of their results so far. Austria is effectively bucking the global illegal migration trend. Austria received 1,835 asylum applications in June 2024, a 64% drop from 2023. Additionally, a clear statement was made public. The half-year results show that the measures are working and that smugglers are avoiding Austria. So while other countries can cast judgments, Not all are without their own backlashes, but of course, others are trying different measures. But the question ultimately is Austria a trailblazer, or is it a near-perfect melding of other countries' policies and measures? Well, first off, let's look at Hungary. Hungary essentially sealed its borders and completely stopped accepting new asylum applications in 2015 when it put up a steel fence and announced zero tolerance for asylum seekers. The 120 million euro, 4-meter-high fence along the 110-mile border with Serbia and Croatia was built to stop migrants on the Balkan land route. Although Austria openly denounced Hungary at the time, its current stance resembles Budapest's. And in 2023, it even joined Hungary in opposing EU migrant quotas. In contrast, Germany and Switzerland maintain more realistic approaches. Germany took in over 1 million first-time asylum applications in 2015, and by 2020, over half of these refugees had found jobs. Today, Germany continues accepting thousands annually, though it has recently reintroduced border checks with Austria. Switzerland, with a smaller scale, enforces strict deportations and has policies like automatic expulsion of criminals, but processes far fewer asylum claims. Italy and France sit somewhere in between. Italy, on the front line of Mediterranean migration, has cracked down on NGO rescue ships and limited migrant transfers within the EU. Austria sympathizes, but has also shut its doors during surges, shown by the Brenner fence threat in 2016 and the threat of sending troops to the border to stop migrants entering in 2017, which saw Rome outraged. How about France? Well, France swings between openness and restriction, and hasn't adopted Austria's zero asylum approach just yet. Overall, Austria is at the forefront of Europe's enforcement wave, pointing to peers like Denmark, which floated its own Rwanda plan, and noted that others are following suit. Austria insists it's just being bold, but critics argue it's rewriting Europe's migration map. When all is said and done, Austria's war on immigration didn't happen overnight. Once a refuge for Bosnians and Hungarians, it has shifted gears to become one of Europe's strictest gatekeepers, building barriers, tightening laws, and challenging EU norms. Supporters see it as protecting national interests. Critics see it as abandoning core values. The real question? As Austria and its neighbors tighten borders, what happens to those fleeing war and persecution? Will Europe close itself off entirely, or can it find a balance? Austria's bold shift not only offers a warning, but a glimpse into a future where the continent redefines its approach to asylum. But one thing is clear. Since 2015, Austria's immigration policy has undergone significant changes. And from that, the world is watching as a new era of enforcement unfolds, truly marking the end of the welcoming chapter. As of right now, it's unclear if this will fix Austria's problems or bring up new ones. But its experiment is without a doubt changing Europe, and nobody can afford to ignore it. What about how Greece is devastated by its immigration crisis?